March 27, 1977, Tenerife, Canary Islands. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday afternoon at a small airport on a Spanish island. Instead, within minutes, it would become the scene of the deadliest accident in aviation history. Two enormous Boeing 747s, among the largest passenger aircraft of their time, would collide on the runway. 583 people would lose their lives. But what makes this tragedy so haunting is that neither aircraft was supposed to crash that day. There was no mechanical failure that suddenly sent a plane falling from the sky. There was no storm tearing an aircraft apart. Instead, a chain of small problems, misunderstandings, pressure, and human decisions came together in exactly the wrong way. Earlier that day, both aircraft were heading toward Gran Canaria Airport, but a bomb explosion at the airport forced arriving flights to divert to nearby Tenerife. Suddenly, a relatively small airport that was not designed to handle so many large aircraft became crowded. Among the diverted aircraft were KLM Flight 405 and Pan Am Flight 1736, both Boeing 747s. What began as an inconvenient diversion was creating the conditions for something far more dangerous. As more aircraft filled the airport, the situation became increasingly complicated. The two 747s were eventually positioned around the runway area, waiting for their opportunity to continue their journeys. Then another problem appeared: fog. Thick fog began reducing visibility across Los Rodeos Airport. From inside the cockpit, pilots could no longer reliably see the entire runway, and when visibility disappears, aviation depends even more heavily on one thing: clear communication. Inside the KLM 747 was Captain Jacob van Zanten, one of the airline's most experienced pilots and a highly respected instructor. His aircraft had been refueled and was preparing to depart. Behind and around the runway area was the Pan Am 747, which was also trying to maneuver into position. Neither crew could clearly see what the other aircraft was doing through the fog. Investigators would later determine that the disaster was not caused by one simple mistake. It was the result of several circumstances coming together. The critical moment came when the KLM aircraft began moving down the runway. The crew believed they were cleared for takeoff, but the tower had not actually given takeoff clearance. This distinction would become one of the most important lessons in aviation history. The KLM aircraft began its takeoff roll while the Pan Am 747 was still somewhere ahead on the same runway. And there was another problem. Because of the fog, the KLM crew could not see the Pan Am aircraft. The Pan Am crew, meanwhile, realized something was terribly wrong. They saw the massive KLM 747 approaching them through the fog. The Pan Am crew attempted to get out of the way, but there was almost no time. The two aircraft were moving toward each other on the same runway, separated by hundreds of meters and closing rapidly. For a few seconds, the pilots were faced with an impossible situation. The KLM 747 was accelerating for takeoff. The Pan Am aircraft was attempting to escape the runway, but the distance disappeared faster than either crew could react. The KLM 747 lifted its nose and became airborne just as it reached the Pan Am aircraft. Its landing gear and lower fuselage struck the Pan Am 747 with devastating force. The collision instantly transformed two enormous passenger jets into burning wreckage. The KLM aircraft was destroyed, and all 248 people aboard were killed. The Pan Am 747 suffered catastrophic damage and fire. Of the 396 people aboard the Pan Am aircraft, 335 died, while 61 survived. In total, 583 people were killed. The accident remains the deadliest crash involving passenger airliners. But the story does not end with the collision. In the aftermath, investigators faced a question that seemed almost impossible to answer. How could two Boeing 747s collide on a runway when both aircraft were operating under the control of trained professionals? The investigation became one of the most extensive aviation accident investigations of its time, involving officials from Spain, the Netherlands, and the United States. Investigators examined wreckage, cockpit recordings, radio communications, crew actions, weather conditions, and the sequence of events leading up to the crash. What they uncovered was a devastating chain of contributing factors. The diverted flights had created congestion. The airport's layout made taxiing complicated. Visibility had deteriorated dramatically. Radio communications were not sufficiently clear. The Pan Am aircraft had not yet cleared the runway, and the KLM captain believed he had received the necessary clearance to begin takeoff. According to the FAA's summary of the accident, the KLM aircraft did not obey the instruction to stand by and ultimately began its takeoff before clearance had been given. The tragedy demonstrated something aviation would never forget. Catastrophic accidents rarely come from one mistake alone. They often develop through a chain of seemingly manageable problems. A diverted flight, a crowded airport, a missing line of sight, a confusing radio transmission, pressure to depart, a misunderstanding in the cockpit, and finally, one decision made at exactly the wrong moment. Remove just one link from that chain, and the disaster might never have happened. The Tenerife disaster permanently changed the way aviation thought about communication and runway safety. Procedures became more focused on eliminating ambiguity between pilots and controllers. Standard phraseology became even more important. Cockpit crews were encouraged to challenge decisions rather than simply accept the assumptions of the most senior person in the cockpit. And runway incursion prevention became a major area of aviation safety. The FAA notes that the accident contributed to changes in air traffic procedures and highlighted the importance of redundancy in preventing human errors. Today, when a pilot hears a takeoff clearance, when a controller gives an instruction, or when a crew member challenges something that doesn't sound right, there is a piece of history behind those procedures. The Tenerife disaster showed the aviation world that experience alone cannot guarantee safety. Even highly trained professionals can misunderstand a situation. Even a moment of uncertainty can become deadly when hundreds of tons of aircraft are moving at high speed. 583 people went to an airport that day expecting to continue their journeys. They never made it to their destinations. Their deaths changed aviation forever, not because the industry forgot the tragedy, but because it studied every moment leading up to it. And that may be the most important lesson of Tenerife. The safest aviation system is not one that assumes humans will never make mistakes. It is one designed so that when someone does make a mistake, the system prevents that mistake from becoming a catastrophe. On March 27, 1977, that protection failed, and the world would never forget what happened on the runway at Tenerife. If you found this story informative, make sure to subscribe to Deep Blue Avionics for more aviation documentaries, incredible aircraft stories, aviation disasters, and the hidden facts behind the world of flight. Turn on notifications so you don't miss our next documentary. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep looking to the skies.